The audience came expecting laughter. Robin Williams was about to give them tears. It was a Tuesday night at the Comedy Store in Los Angeles, 1997. The room was packed with nearly 300 people, all crammed into the intimate space that had launched countless careers. They had come to see Robin Williams do what he did best: make them forget their troubles, make them laugh until their sides hurt, make them believe that joy was still possible in a complicated world. Robin walked onto that stage like he had 1,000 times before. The energy was electric. He grabbed the microphone with that familiar manic energy, his eyes already scanning the room, reading the audience like a book he'd memorized years ago. The first few minutes were pure Robin, rapid-fire impressions, voices bouncing from character to character, physical comedy that seemed to defy the laws of physics and logic. The crowd was eating it up. Laughter rolled through the room in waves. This was the Robin Williams they had paid to see, the genius who could transform a simple observation into a symphony of comedy, who could make you laugh and think simultaneously. But then something happened that no one in that room would ever forget. And it started with a song playing softly from the bar area in the back. Subscribe now, because what happens next changed everything Robin thought he knew about himself. The song was "What a Wonderful World" by Louis Armstrong. It had been playing on the bar's sound system, barely audible over the laughter and Robin's performance. Just background noise. Ambience. Nothing that should have mattered. But Robin heard it. Mid-sentence, mid-gesture, mid-laugh, he stopped. Completely. The microphone still in his hand, his mouth still open from whatever joke he was about to deliver, but frozen. The transition was so abrupt that the audience thought it was part of the act. They waited for the punchline, for the callback, for whatever brilliant comedic turn this was leading to. It didn't come. Robin just stood there, his head tilted slightly, as if he was trying to confirm what he was hearing. His eyes, which moments before had been wild with comedic energy, suddenly went somewhere else. Somewhere far away. Somewhere the audience couldn't follow. "Do you hear that?" he asked quietly, his voice completely different from the manic performance voice he'd been using. This was Robin's real voice. Soft. Vulnerable. Human. The crowd went silent. Confused. Concerned. "That song," he continued barely above a whisper. The microphone picked it up and carried it through the suddenly quiet room. "I haven't heard that song in 32 years. He lowered the microphone slowly, as if it had suddenly become too heavy to hold. His other hand came up to his face, covering his mouth for a moment. The audience could see his chest rising and falling with deep breaths. Some people in the front row leaned forward, worried something was medically wrong. Robin walked slowly to the stool that sat at the side of the stage, the one he usually ignored during his high-energy performances. He sat down, still holding the microphone loosely in his hand. The song continued to play from the back of the room. "I see trees of green, red roses too. My father," Robin said finally, his voice thick with emotion he wasn't trying to hide, "played this song every Sunday morning when I was a kid." The audience was completely still now. This wasn't comedy anymore. This was something else entirely. Something raw and real and unscripted. What nobody in that audience knew was that Robin's father had died 6 months earlier. And Robin hadn't cried once. Robin sat on that stool, microphone hanging loosely in his hand, and for the first time in 6 months, the wall he'd built around his grief began to crack. "My dad was not an emotional man," Robin continued, his voice steady but quiet. "He was from that generation, you know? The war generation. They didn't talk about feelings. They didn't hug. They didn't say I love you the way we do now." He paused, listening to the song. Louis Armstrong's gravelly voice filled the space Robin's comedy had occupied just moments before. But every Sunday morning, without fail, he would put this record on. And for exactly 3 minutes and 21 seconds, while this song played, he would be different. Softer. He would stand at the kitchen window, looking out at whatever suburban Michigan morning we were having, and he would just listen. The audience was transfixed. Some people had tears in their eyes, though they didn't fully understand why yet. I remember watching him from the doorway. Robin said, a small smile crossing his face at the memory. I must have been 7 or 8 years old. And I remember thinking that this must be what my father was like inside, underneath all the silence and the sternness. That this song was somehow a window into a part of him he didn't know how to show us any other way. He looked down at the microphone in his hands as if seeing it for the first time. He died in March. Robin said simply. Heart attack. Quick. Clean. The way he would have wanted it, I suppose. No fuss. No drama. Very him. Someone in the audience made a soft sound of sympathy. And I went to the funeral, and I gave the eulogy, and I stood there in front of all those people, and I talked about what a good man he was, what a hard worker he was, how he provided for his family. All true things. All correct things to say. Robin's voice caught slightly, and he paused to collect himself. But I didn't cry. Not at the funeral. Not at the burial. Not in the 6 months since. Because I realized that I didn't know how to mourn someone I never really knew. How do you grieve for a man who was in your house every day but who never really let you in? The Comedy Store had never been this quiet. 300 people holding their collective breath. And then I walk out here tonight, Robin continued, gesturing vaguely at the stage around him. To do what I always do, to make people laugh, to be the happy clown, and the universe decides to play this song. This one song. Out of all the millions of songs in the world. He looked up at the audience, his eyes red but not yet crying. And suddenly I'm 8 years old again, standing in that doorway, watching my father be vulnerable for 3 minutes and 21 seconds. And I realized that was his way. That was how he said I love you. That was how he showed us that underneath the silence, there was a man who saw beauty in the world, who believed that this world, despite everything, was wonderful. A tear rolled down Robin's cheek. He didn't wipe it away. And I never told him that I understood. I never told him that those Sunday mornings meant something to me. I never played this song for him before he died and said, Dad, I get it. I see you. I know who you are underneath. The song was ending now, Louis Armstrong's voice fading. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Robin stood up from the stool. The audience didn't know if he was going to continue the show, leave the stage, or collapse. He did none of those things. Instead, he walked to the center of the stage, looked out at the crowd, and said with a sad smile, So I guess what I'm trying to say is, talk to your parents. Tell them you see them. Tell them you understand. Tell them while they can still hear it. Because one day, a song is going to play in some random comedy club, and you're going to wish you had. He paused, then added softly, And it turns out you can miss someone you never really knew. You can grieve for conversations you never had. You can mourn the relationship that could have been, even if it never was. The applause started slowly. Then it built. Then people were standing. Not because it was funny, but because it was true. Robin stood there, tears now freely flowing down his face, and he let himself feel it. All of it. The loss. The regret. The love that had been there all along, just expressed in a language he had finally learned to understand. He didn't try to transition back into comedy. He didn't try to lighten the mood or make a joke to ease the tension. He just stood there, in that moment, human and vulnerable and real. After a long moment, he raised the microphone one more time. Thank you for letting me share that, he said simply. Sometimes we come to these places to laugh. Sometimes we come to remember. Tonight you gave me permission to do both. He set the microphone gently back in its stand and walked off stage. No big exit. No flourish. Just a man who had finally let himself feel something he'd been carrying for 6 months. The audience remained standing, many of them crying now too. Not for Robin's father, whom they'd never met, but for their own fathers, their own mothers, their own relationships that existed in the space between what was said and what was meant. The club owner found Robin backstage 20 minutes later, sitting alone in the dressing room, staring at nothing in particular. You okay? The owner asked, genuinely concerned. Robin looked up and smiled, a real smile this time, not a performance. "Yeah," he said. "I think I actually am. I've never seen anything like that in 30 years of running this club." Robin nodded slowly. "Neither have I. And I've been doing this my whole life." "Are you going to be able to finish the week?" the owner asked, because Robin was scheduled for 6 more shows. "Absolutely," Robin said. "But I think the shows are going to be a little different now." And they were. For the rest of that week, Robin Williams did something he had never done in his entire career. He incorporated silence into his act. He let moments breathe. He let emotions sit without rushing to cover them with a joke. He allowed his audience to feel, not just laugh. Word spread quickly in the comedy community. People who had seen Robin perform 1,000 times came back, because they'd heard something had changed. And it had. Robin Williams had always been brilliant at making people laugh. But that night in 1997, he learned something more important. He was also capable of making people feel. And sometimes, that was more powerful than any joke. Share this story if you've ever mourned someone you wish you'd known better. Subscribe, because the most important conversations are the ones we need to have while we still can. And leave a comment telling us about a song that takes you back. Because we all have one. We all have that one song that opens doors we thought we'd closed forever. Years later, when people would ask Robin about that night, he would get quiet for a moment, the way he did on that stage, and then he would say, "That was the night I stopped performing and started being present. That was the night I realized that the most courageous thing a performer can do is stop performing." He would tell them about how, after that performance, he went home and spent hours digging through old family photos. Pictures of his father he hadn't looked at in years. In one particular photograph, taken in the early 1960s, his father stood in the backyard, one hand shielding his eyes from the sun, the other holding a garden hose. It was such an ordinary moment, so unremarkable that Robin had passed over it 1,000 times before. But that night, looking at it with new eyes, he saw something different. He saw a man who was present, who was there, even if he didn't know how to express it in words. Robin started carrying that photograph with him. Not in his wallet, but tucked into whatever book he was reading at the time. A bookmark of sorts. A reminder that love doesn't always announce itself with grand gestures and eloquent speeches. Sometimes it's just a man standing in a backyard, watering plants, being there. Sometimes it's a song played on Sunday mornings, a window into a soul that didn't know how to open doors. The next time Robin performed, 2 nights after that emotional night, he walked onto the same stage at the Comedy Store. The audience didn't know what to expect. Would they get the manic Robin? Would they get the vulnerable Robin? What they got was something better. They got the whole Robin. The comedy was still there, sharp and brilliant as ever. But now there were pauses. Moments of reflection. Brief windows where the audience could see not just the performer, but the person. One woman in the audience that night would later write about the experience. "It was like watching someone who had been running his entire life finally learn to walk. Not slower, not less energetic, but more intentional. Every step meant something. And to this day, there are 300 people who were in the Comedy Store that Tuesday night in 1997 who will tell you they witnessed something sacred. They came for comedy and left with permission to grieve, to feel, to be human. That's the real magic of Robin Williams. Not that he could make us laugh, though he could do that better than almost anyone. The real magic was that he could make us feel less alone in our humanity. He could take his broken pieces and show them to us in a way that made our own broken pieces seem less shameful, less isolating, less permanent. What a wonderful world! Played in that comedy club for 3 minutes and 21 seconds. But the moment it created lasted forever in the hearts of everyone who was there to witness it. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, maybe Robert Williams Sr. finally heard his son say, "I see you, Dad. I always saw you. And that song? That beautiful song you played every Sunday? I finally understand what you were trying to tell us." This video is a fictional dramatization inspired by the public persona and performances of Robin Williams. It is created to honor his legacy and the emotional depth he brought to his craft.